Good morning and good afternoon to everyone from Belgrade. My name is Maja Piščević. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council from Washington. I'm very happy and grateful to CIPE for inviting me to be part of this timely and topical event, the first ever global online conference of the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network. Welcome to the first panel discussion on how to navigate recovery after global pandemic. This 1-hour session will cover priorities for resilience and recovery and the role of advocacy and public-private dialogue in advancing these priorities. I have a fantastic panel of experts who will address some of the key questions and dilemmas that entrepreneurs are and will be facing in the coming years as a consequence of the unprecedented experience that hit the world in 2020. Since 2020, nearly all governments and markets have been challenged by combined health and economic shocks. Almost all firms have been negatively affected by the pandemic. As we all know, informal businesses and women-led firms have been hit the hardest. Governments all over the world had to make difficult policy decisions in an effort to balance the need for short-term economic relief with longer-term goals for fiscal stability and competitiveness. In some countries, governments turn to the private sector for answers to the crisis response, while in some cases they try to do it on their own and ask the private sector to step in to fill a void in leadership when government responses were blind to their effect on the economy. Some businesses adapted quickly, while others struggled to stay afloat or to meet the needs of their communities. Economic rebuilding provides opportunities to innovate, improve the business environment, and make markets work for everyone, but it also presents the risk. How can governments and the private sector navigate the policy choices and actions needed for recovery and move through the uncertainty surrounding those decisions? And just as importantly, what are the implications for democracy? Our panelists will share their experience in how government responses affected their constituencies and examples on how the private sector has acted in navigating crisis response and setting priorities for longer-term recovery in their respective countries. Before we hear from our experts, let me remind you that this session is being recorded and also invite you to use the Q&A feature to enter your question or vote the question to the top. You are welcome to use the chat feature as well. The way we will conduct this panel is through 3 rounds of questions, with each of the panelists answering every question. Panelists are encouraged also to share their stories. So let's start with the first question. How did your constituency, the business people or entrepreneurs you work with, feel when the 2020 health and economic crisis hit? How were they affected, and how did government ameliorate or worsen the situation? So let me start with my dear friend, Camila Bulat, Executive Director of the Regional Center for Organization Management based in Romania. Camila holds over 20 years of experience working across nonprofit, public and private sectors in transition economies. She has worked intensively to promote public accountability, transparency, and citizen participation in the decision-making process in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northern Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Camila is also an entrepreneur. In 2006, she started Ubicons International, a training and consulting company that provides services in Romania and neighboring countries. Camila is an active member of the Professional Women Network Romania, the Vice President of the Professional Lobby Specialist Corps, and the member of Steering Committee of the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network at CIPE. So Camila, the floor is yours. I understand that you're in Baku, in Azerbaijan right now. I assume you will share with us your story from Romania.
Right. Thank you, Maya. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Very briefly, what was the story of the Romanian story, 2020, right? We have COVID. So I think that our story is very similar to what we've seen in not only in the neighboring countries, but also globally. So it was a lot of confusion. It was a lot of uncertainty, unclarity, and more or less underestimate of the situation. Because this was the first time after so many years of an unprecedented crisis, nobody knew what to expect. The private sector didn't know how much, how intense, what should we be doing, and not the government. So in a way, everybody was in the same situation. How to assess what cannot be assessed, how to navigate, how to develop solutions, and how do we know if those solutions are the right ones? So the government in Romania was in that position, and it was not an easy one as everywhere else. What we've seen in our case was that the government was willing to protect people. So at the beginning, for a few months, it was about people. It was about people's health. It was about developing quick measures to respond, to take care of people. So one of the things that happened is that one of the first policies that were created by the Romanian government was to cover for a fraction of the salary of the workers, so that they could continue and not, that companies could have keep them. But at the same time, as things evolved, that was not enough. And while before the pandemic in Romania, there were 5 million labor contracts, so 5 million workers. In a few months, we had only 4 million people working. 1 million were laid off. And that 1 million came entirely from the private sector. So, by summer, autumn, you would have a disparity. Whoever worked at the private company, now the salary shrank, maybe he or she was unemployed, but whoever worked on the public sector, they were still there and their salaries were intact. So in a way, that created a lot of frustration among the private sector, and they started the discussion about more support, actual support to business sector started to be, more, I don't want to say the word aggressive, but more firm. Because what happened in 2020, as we saw it, is that it was the first year when the private sector was left alone. The government was there with a talk. I mean, always supporting with words. Well, the actual factual support was not there all the time. Back to you, Maya.
Okay, that was very interesting. And I think there's actually a lot of common in what happened and the reactions that we've seen in Serbia and the Balkans, I would say. So our second distinguished panelist, Katerina Glaskova, comes from Ukraine. Katerina has headed the Union of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs since its founding in 2016. The Union of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs is one of the largest and most influential business communities in Ukraine, focused on representing and protecting the interests of independent entrepreneurs, regardless of the scale, area, and location of their business activity. Under Ms. Glaskova's leadership, SUP has united 800 plus companies from all Ukraine. During her career, she has also done other interesting jobs. Katerina has organized large business events, including Business Wisdom Summit, Forbes Club, Forbes Conference, SUP Day Forum, and she also worked in government communications. So Katerina, welcome, and please share with us your story from Ukraine.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Maya. It's a great pleasure for me to share the SUP experience and to be the voice of Ukrainian entrepreneurs in such discussion. Now I'm in Lviv, not in Kyiv, and today we celebrate the Constitution Day, 25 years of Ukrainian Constitution. Maybe it's some symbol to to talk today about the situation in Ukraine. It was a really hard year, even more than a year for all of us, of course. As well, we, during this period, saw confusion, saw misunderstanding about how to manage the crisis. It was from private sector, from entrepreneurs, from government, from society. Everybody, anybody know what to do and how it will be developed in next periods. In Ukraine, with strict quarantine measures have been introduced since mid-March 2020. It was the first but not last quarantine in our country. And we have some formats of this quarantine. For example, for instance, weekend quarantine or something else. And of course, the work of plenty of companies in the field of service, entertainment, restaurants, hospitality, they have been stopped. And the majority of this business are SMEs. They represent the SME sectors. And so the most suffer companies of these restrictions were as well SME companies. And we had some during this period, our business association, because I represent the business association, tried to make regular surveys to understand the real situation in business society. And we ask every quarter and even every month at the start of this quarantine situation, we ask entrepreneurs about the barriers to business that were escalated during this pandemic period, about the survival, recovering strategies at that time, and ask them to evaluate government support measures. And our finding were the following: the epidemic and quarantine measures have put every 10th small businesses on the verge of a closure. 30% of micro and small enterprises and 35% of medium-sized enterprises suffered significant losses. In addition, our survey also showed that the most entrepreneurs expected financial support from the authority. Tax exemptions or significant reductions of the taxes, compensation for losses from restrictions, or available resources to meet current obligations. It should be noted that gradually the state introduced some mechanism to support business, especially SME business, but it wasn't enough. And now we sometimes even still help to state, business still help to state to cope and to manage this pandemic situation. It's very important remark, because it's that historically Ukrainians have always demonstrated their ability to unite in such crisis situation, and this crisis is not an exception. I want to tell you that even currently, Ukrainian businesses, even the smallest company with great and with huge problem, channel big sum of money to support healthcare, by purchasing medical equipment, personal protective equipment, reagents and tests. No, and now the situation more better, but in 2020 we have a lot of problem even in such areas like reagents and tests. We preventing risk groups from catching the infection, for instance, organize free dinners, deliveries of dinners. All of this make businesses, small, big, micro enterprises, help government to manage all this situation. And a lot of our members have already allocated more than 20 million, hryvnias, I don't count in dollars, I'm sorry, to fight COVID. And one more remark, it's a good news. Our last surveys show that Ukrainian business is adapting to the new reality, to the new business life, new situation, and expect mostly more than 50%, more than even 60%, expects growth, development plans for this year, and this is the data of our latest business mood surveys of SUP members. But this situation is similar in the whole country. We have a big optimistic plans, and the mood now more optimistic than a year ago. And in short, I try to tell you the situation in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Katerina. And it's important to see this story about the solidarity, because this is something that we've all become very sensitive to in the past year, I would say. And now, just to prove that this is not an all-women panel, we are moving to our colleague Harun Sidat, who comes from Mauritania. Harun is a senior private sector development specialist with over 18 years of professional experience working on development across Africa. He has been working extensively with all major international development institutions, including the World Bank, African Development Bank, European Union Commission, United Nations Development Programme, and CIPE. His professional experience includes working across public and private sector, as well as supporting civil society associations and research think tanks on a wider development spectrum with focus on socioeconomic inclusion, public-private dialogue, and governance. So same question for you, Harun. How was your constituency, the businesses or enterprises that you work with across Africa, how did they feel, and how were they affected by the 2020 health and economic crisis?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Africa is very diverse, so I'm going to focus on maybe the Sahel region, which is the region known to be the region of the 5 countries experiencing some insecurity issues. I am right now based in Mauritania, in Nouakchott, the capital city of Mauritania, which is a part of the G5 Sahel countries. So in general, I think what has been mentioned about the surprise and the chaos and the challenges is very much similar across the world, and it's very, very true to our countries. The specificity maybe that we have is that we have a private sector that is majority informal, and the informal sector is also a very, I would say, survival business sector, meaning that it's a day-to-day business. So when you have restrictions in terms of curfews, transport or logistics restrictions, you are impacting immediately those who live on a day-to-day basis. And when those people are not registered, any program that you do to support the private sector would automatically leave them out. And so the government, like any other government, works in providing some social support. Private sector, the structured private sector participated in a fund, a COVID fund, that was allocated in terms of supporting the very poor families across the country. But in terms of the businesses, we saw the pandemic wiping out probably about 30. The World Bank is saying 30 to 40% of the informal sector, micro and self-employment activity. And this is maybe even more important in a country where you have an employment rate at about 32% in a country. When you add to that the people basically losing the businesses, and you put that in the context of a region that is very volatile in terms of security, in terms of geostrategic issues, that becomes a very, very big issue. So international donors have participated in many activities to kind of support and increase the impact of the government on families and on people who have lost their jobs, whether it's unemployment, formal or informal business activities. But the general impression is that the economy has been hit very hard, and the very big companies have been struggling to stay alive, but the very small private sector has been basically either wiped out or having to really restructure in terms of the new era. We have been very fortunate in comparison to the rest of the world with regard to the numbers of cases and the health challenges. And this is also something that has created a lot of frustration, because people are very frustrated that we have a lot of restrictions to avoid the spread of a virus, when in fact the death or the life challenges of the restrictions are much higher than potentially the virus itself. And so we have been facing a lot of political instability based on this. People wanting to basically open up the borders, open up the businesses, and stop this nonsense of controlling the virus, because at the end of the day, the death rate of the virus is much lower than the death rate of, like, for example, malaria or other issues that we have in the countries that have been very normal in the past years and have never led to any restrictions. So this is kind of, just to give you in a brief way, the atmosphere and the challenges of the COVID affecting businesses in Mauritania and in the Sahel region.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting and good news to hear that your country was not that hard hit like for instance the Balkans, where I am, the rest of Europe, and I would say America as well. So moving to the next question, I want to ask you, how did your constituency react? What did they do to cope, to pivot, and to influence government response to the crisis? So Camelia, let's start from you again.
Okay, so for me again, what I want to say, I believe that everywhere the business community did the best that they could, meaning they try to organize, they try to get in touch with the government, they come to discuss, to present, to negotiate. I mean, I would say business as usual. But there is one thing that I want to stress here, which is the aspect of the human solidarity, which I come from Romania. So 30 years ago, it was a Romanian revolution. Well, now with COVID, I have the same feeling of the human solidarity, which I've witnessed and I've lived 30 years ago. And I will give you two very brief two examples. I mean, in Romania, we have a coalition of women national business associations, right? We call it CAFA, and we have these networks. We are very in contact. And one of the things that it was popping up, what can we do? Well, okay, the government needs money. It's not about asking money from the government, but what about giving money to the government? So every company in Romania would pay its taxes by the 25th of the month. This is on a monthly basis. So we decided, if we can, why don't we pay this money in advance? If anyway I'm going to pay this money, so be it. So for, no press release, no nothing. It was, if we can do it, we don't want recognition. If we can help why shouldn't we? So for, whoever could have done it, and even myself, I pay my taxes for months in advance. I still do, because anyway, I'm going to pay them. Why not help the government when they need it? So it's not only about asking, it's about also how can we contribute, even if nobody knows about it, or it's not about making it public. Another initiative, young entrepreneurs, 35 years, he has a restaurant chain. Now, restaurants are closed, we know that. So what he did is that he's from Moldova, which is the northern part of Romania. He went on Facebook and said, if you are a worker in the emergency sector, policeman, doctor, name it, we are willing to give you free meals. Because anyway, we have the restaurants, we have, he's just sent us your orders. So how come free? Yes, please. If we are going to be bankrupted, it will not be because we are helping you or we are doing this. So these are, and I remember this went viral everywhere. Someone from a hospital said, how many can we order? Said, how many you need? It's the only thing that I'm asking is that you send your order by 10 a.m. so that we can deliver to your police, hospital, or wherever you are by lunchtime. So these are just examples of how the business community, it's not only about negotiating, asking, advocacy, it's about really human solidarity, which at the end of the day matters. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Camilla. It's really it's really impressive to hear this story and to hear about entrepreneurs paying taxes in advance. But that also tells us a little bit about the strengths of the Romanian economy, you know, because in other parts of the world, and I'm again referring maybe to Serbia, that would be really hard.
I wouldn't generalize it. I would say whoever was able to do it.
Okay,
because
but your
Romania
economy is doing well. Yeah, you know. Yeah, of course. It's still really impressive. So, Katerina, tell us a little bit how your constituencies in Ukraine reacted. You're mute.
Excuse me. I'm sure associations are made for times like this and could help for private sector and for authority to make this dialogue as better as well as we can. And we see our key role to help businesses, entrepreneurs to survive, to understand, to survive this crisis with minimum losses, not without losses, but with minimum losses. And our primary activity now and during this even more than a year, 15 months, is communication. We communicate all day long, 7 days a week, 24/7 communications with our members, with authorities, with entrepreneurs, with media, and we talk about different problems. We advocate our priorities. And we start some tools, some special tools to communicate with our businesses, with entrepreneurs. For example, first we launched a business hotline because we have a lot of questions how to manage in this time. And we launched a business hotline where anyone, not only members of SUB, but anyone can get legal advice on any quarantine and recent legislative changes. We provide explanation of these changes. We have a lot of changes, different restrictions, new rules, how to work today or tomorrow. And we provide explanations for our audience, for all entrepreneurs as well, not only for SUB members. And in parallel, we held on meetings with authorities. During a long time, we hold it online, but now we try to start a little bit to meet offline, and we believe we could do it next some months minimum before new wave of pandemic. Unfortunately, we say about it in Ukraine. Maybe we will have it on September, but I believe everything will be more or less good. And we every week released to our members the results of the week, what we do, what news, what they can to do in such situation, how they manage with crisis, and ask them what they need, what is their most need. As I mentioned before, during all this period, we conduct some regular service to understand the mood of business mood and behavior during this period. And based on this result of the service, SUB has developed for government a package of necessary measures to support entrepreneurs, especially SME business. And last year, with CIPE assistance, we set up an analytical center. It's a main task of this center to strengthen the analytical and lawmaking function of our association. And we could the expert of our analytical center prepared our offers, and we write even part of laws or special documents about anti-crisis measures to support business. It was really a good help for authority to give them not only ideas, but real help in such way to prepare such documents. And our experts are members of the expert groups under the Prime Minister, under the line minister, for example, the Minister of Finance and Minister of Economics. So we try to discuss this situation with all stakeholders. And for instance, some our victories. One of them maybe looks not so serious, but that was really important, is gaining permission for the pet shops and veterinary clinics to work during the quarantine. For some reason, the government believes that it shouldn't be closed, but it was a real problem. It was not a problem of business, it was a problem of society. And we were the force which talked about this problem with authority. I have a lot of examples frequently about our advocacy in such time, but I want to take one more example. We realize that now it was the time to consolidate our partnership, to strong partnership, and we set up a temporary union of different associations, regional association, professional business association. We named it COVID Business Headquarters. The aim of this union was to consolidate initiatives and to be the one voice of business, of entrepreneurs for the authority. And we together can help entrepreneurs communicate their demands to the government and eventually survive the crisis. There we have 16 organizations we joined to this headquarters from different regions, and we have strongest argument, number of workplace and paid taxes in Ukraine all together, and it was our great arguments in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really impressive, and I don't know what to raise first. First, the business hotline is a very good idea, and I hope your businesses used it as they had it available. And then the analytical center providing practical support, I think that's fantastic, and wish there was this kind of tool in many other countries in our part of the world. And then as someone who has 2 dogs and a cat, I think this fact that veterinary clinics remained open is really a good sign. And the temporary union of business associations, which, you stopped competing practically for a limited period of time. And I hope this stays in place. Okay, so Haroom, I think the crisis came a little bit later, arrived to Africa, and correct me if I'm wrong. So did this help a little bit in terms of preparing for what was to come?
Thank you. No, I think, by the way, congratulations to Katrina on definitely the analytical center is an initiative that we wish we had in many of the African countries, because we basically stopped giving proposition because of the management of the crisis, instead of actually using that time, the idle time, to produce proposition and engage the government. We basically wasted a lot of time. But to come back to our region, yes, indeed, we were hit a little bit later, but the informality of the sector, I would say the vulnerability of the economy in general, basically did not allow neither the government nor the private sector to really take the lesson and be prepared. I think it still did hit us with a surprise, in a sense that we didn't see gradual measures. We actually had very drastic measures happening when the numbers went very high very quickly. So this didn't really give us a lot of space. And in terms of the way business associations and businesses have reacted, I think it is important to know that in our region, unfortunately, people went back to what we call communitarian solidarity. So if you are from an ethnic group, or you are from a tribe, or you are from a region, you basically went back to your origin to get that solidarity in, which is very dangerous for the country, because the country is basically composed of different ethnic groups, united under a republic, and then the republic is kind of the motivation of everybody, and that kind of support the people. And so in this situation, people basically end up having to go back and rely on traditional means, which is basically tribal and ethnic groups, and then fighting within those ethnic groups to get the attention of the government and get the support of the government. And so that is a very dangerous concept, because it basically takes away the work of over 50 years of a republican construction, of a democratic system, trying to see equality between people, and then stepping away from the tribes and the communities. And we saw violence at the community level based on this. And so that is unfortunately the challenge. Yes, we did have some dialogue with the government. Business association had dialogue with the government, but unfortunately, the dialogue often has been branded as communitarian dialogue or regional dialogue rather than actually a business dialogue. And so that decredibilized the voice of the private sector and pushed back many years of advancement in terms of coalition, in terms of business associations. We are now seeing the private sector going back on the front lines in terms of discussion, because public sector is requesting the private sector involvement, and so that is giving some room, and hopefully that's gonna step away from the communitarian and ethnic division that we have seen during the heart of the pandemic.
Thank you, Harun. I wish this conversation and these ideas that we hear from other participants will also help you promote some of the good practices and ideas in the coming period. And actually, my third question is about the future. I wanted to ask each one of you, how is your constituency being proactive about advancing recovery or planning for the post-recovery economy? How are businesses and public-private dialogue shaping the direction of recovery to meet the priority needs? Camelia.
Very quickly, back from report from Romania. I mean, once pandemic evolved, we moved into the business as usual discussion between the business community and the government. So we had a lot of discussions, open doors from the government. What happened is not all the promises were kept. So while the door was open, while you would have endless discussions, when you're looking for real concrete measure or financial support, that was lacking or always a promise. So it came up to the idea of government, keep your promise or deliver on the promise you've made, because we are dying. We, the business community, cannot, it's now a survival matter. It's about whether we will shut down the companies. We have already laid out 1 million from 5 million employees. So really, this is very serious. So the discussions were very heated. And to give you once again an example from the tourist sector in my country, the government decision shut down the tourist sector for 320 days. They couldn't operate. So this was government decision, right? Not only Romania, everywhere. Well, then to compensate for the losses, government promised 500 million euros as financial compensation under a certain algorithm. Not much of money, but important money for the Romanian companies and hospitality industry. This money didn't show up. Again, discussion. This money is not showing up. Again, discussion. Now, early this year, the employers, the conglomerate of the hospitality industry decided to go to court. So really, they filed an action in court, taking the government to court because you are not delivering the promise. You shut us down and you're not delivering on the financial compensation. In 1 month after this filing in court, the government published in the official gazette the financial support of 200 million euros, not 500 as promised, but they did it. So it was published. Now it is no longer a promise. It is a legal policy. So sometimes really you have to move out from a business discussion to really more drastic measures if there is no other way. But at the end of the day, it was, and it still is, very hard for both, very hard for everybody, government, business community, and people, kids, everybody's struggling. Everybody's trying to find a way for, to make it happen, but it's not an easy one. And we hope for a better tomorrow. That's the floor back to you, Maya.
Thank you. We all do. Katerina, how is your constituency being proactive about advancing recovery or planning for the post-recovery economy?
Thank you. No, we realize that Ukrainian economy is not so strong. And of course, we are not waiting a little big helping in million euros from our authority to the entrepreneurs. We are talking about reforms which could help to recover. And we therefore are lobbying for business support package. We also appeal to the parliament, the government, to the office of the president for a list of urgent measures and reforms needed to restart the economy. And some of them were taken into account. But in addition, for these 5 years, we have a business agenda, top 10 priorities of business to authority. There are priorities to create a favorable business climate in Ukraine. And we have been promoting this initiative for several years, as I mentioned, and some of them were implemented, for example, start of privatization or reforms of lending reform. We opened the lending market in Ukraine through 30 years. This market was closed. We update this list of the priorities several weeks ago with our members and refresh this list. And we are going to present it to the authorities and to the society, to the media next days. The first two positions in this list are still occupied by tax issues. There are still no real tax reform in Ukraine. We are waiting for it for a lot of years, and it would be not about it's about reducing, but always it's about allow to eliminate corruption in the tax authorities. It's very important for us, and so far we are. Start new project with CIPE assistance advocacy school. It is a national project. We meet with the purpose of the school is to build the private dialogue with to build dialogue with private sector and regional authorities, and we meet with business and with regional authorities and try to build the dialogue to how to overcome crisis altogether, and why it's important to have this discussion, especially in Ukraine where we have the decentralization reform. It's very important for us to have this dialogue not only on the high level of authorities but in regions as well. And our speakers, we talk about best practice in advocacy, not only of SUP best practice, but even international examples, our colleagues from different countries. And we explain for entrepreneurs why it is very important to join, to unite, and to have this discussion with authorities. And for authorities, we say about important to have like with entrepreneurs and to have the win-win in such situations. Our new project, we have been visited four towns, four region, and we plan to visit different regions during all the year, maybe even the next year as well.
Thank you, Katerina. Harun, same question for you. How are businesses and public-private dialogue in Mauritania shaping the direction of recovery to meet the priority needs in the post-COVID economy?
So the positive outcome with regard to COVID, if we can talk about positive outcome, is that first of all, the public sector has really taken stock of the need for the private sector in terms of employment, in terms of contribution to the economy. I think we saw that in the way
Harun, have we lost you?
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Harun, we can hear you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the public sector has now really understood the need for private sector in terms of employment, in terms of wealth creation, and in terms of participation in times of crisis. So I think private sector is coming now to the table with a little bit more leverage in terms of bargaining power. And that's very important. The second point that I think is also very important is that many countries, and especially the countries in this region, have really understood the importance of investing in private sector in terms of self-sufficiency, whether it's with regard to agriculture, whether it's regard to some other types of commodities, because of the logistic constraints have really shown the vulnerabilities of the economy. So there is a major investment packages that are being prepared to relaunch the economy and really direct it to private sector locally. And so that also is a very positive and bright look into the future. And the third point is that many of these countries have now really understood the linkage between private sector contribution to security and to development. I think in the past, security has been seen as an issue with regard to politics, with regard to the military, and private sector was not seen as an ally in terms of preserving stability and producing local resilience. And I think this has been affirmed strongly by the pandemic, and so that is also a very important element of the crisis. And so we were seeing a new dynamic in terms of dialogue, a new inclusion of the private sector, and definitely we are hoping for a brighter future with regard to public-private dialogue and to a private investment development in our region.
Thank you so much. I mean, these answers provided a lot of thought for food for thought for us in all parts of the world, I'm sure. And I'm so sorry to see that we don't have much time left, actually. So, but I will try to take at least one question that we have received before we close. But before we start the Q&A, I have one question for the audience. And I think the event producer will display the question now. We have the results already. Okay, let us see the results. Just a second. Something has stuck. I'm afraid I'm not able to. Can you read them for me? Can you read them for me? Okay, A, continued government relief for business workers and others where it needed 11%. Oh, public health measures to contain the pandemic and vaccinate people, 24%. New business strategies that address social disparities and sustainability, 24%. Adopt regulations to support innovations in digital economy, 11%. Promote business environment reforms to attract investment and strengthen competitiveness, 16%. And public-private dialogue to coordinate recovery, 17%. With this, we will only focus on one more question, and I'm going to read it to our panelists for just a quick response, if possible. What are the most effective policies for business survival, or what have been the most effective policies for business survival, or policies you are advocating for recovery? Let's start with the same order.
Okay, very quickly, business recovery. So we are, I don't know which were the most effective, but I can think of the ones that worked. I mean, financial support for companies that were restricted to operate, so to be compensated for those restrictions. Support to a delay in paying taxes for certain sectors that worked also well. In addition, it was an incentive if from the government, if you are paying taxes on time, then you would have 10% deduction, which worked also well. So a mix of tax incentives, a mix of financial support, a mix of other support to employees, that worked. I don't know if they were the most effective, but for the time being, it seems so.
Thank you. I'm sure that's a good recommendation. So, Katerina, back to you.
Very short, thank you. Tax holiday for some categories of SME for these lockdown periods. One of the latest, and from my opinion, one of the most effective, the government will compensate a part of the salaries to officially employed workers of small manufacturing companies if they were forced to reduce working hours. It's not about saving money, it's more about saving jobs. It's very important point.
Yes, that's a long-term important point. Harun, what about the most effective policies in your mind?
No, I think it's exactly the same. It's a combination of financial and non-financial services. Financial, as Camilla said, taxes, liquidity injection, whether it's through credit or other forms, and then also the possibility of involving them into a non-technical services to really get the machine restarted. But I fully agree. I think what Camilla and Katerina said is probably the most effective.
Thank you. And just briefly, if you have, or any of you have any final lesson or recommendation that you want to make or leave behind, please, this is your time to share it with us. Camilla, Katerina, Harun. I guess you're all fine. Yeah, please do.
No, I think this was very, very helpful. I just think that the learning from each other is really important. I think that experiences in different countries showed that there are things that have worked and other countries could have benefited from that, especially given the delay into the different waves. Unfortunately, there is no outlet for that. And so everybody seems to be navigating on what they see and not based on experience and capital that is built by other countries. Would be very interesting to find a way to capitalize on that. Thank you.
I fully agree with you, and I couldn't stop writing some of the ideas and best practices that we heard. And I think this is really the value of the meetings like this, even when virtual. It would be even better if we could talk to each other on the hall and have a coffee together. Maybe we could come up with some new ideas, but that will be the future soon, I hope. Thank you so much. This was really a fascinating discussion, and I hope we will all keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.